Welcome to a Simple Therapy podcast. Real conversations, brave stories, and simple, soulful insights for therapists and anyone on a healing journey. I'm Sindee Gozansky, licensed therapist, supervisor, and a fellow human figuring it out too. Around here, we believe healing doesn't have to be complicated, and that leading with your heart still matters. We talk about what it really means to be human in and out of the therapy room. You'll hear from therapists, mental health professionals, and people courageously sharing their personal healing journeys. Because whether you're the therapist or the client, we're all human here. Let's keep it simple and keep showing up. Hello and welcome to another episode of A Simple Therapy podcast. I'm Sindee Gozansky, your host, and I'm really grateful that you joined us today. I know that you have lots of podcasts to choose from, and I appreciate you tuning in. I really believe that if you're here, you're so interested in personal growth, in your own healing, and in somehow helping others with becoming the better version of themselves too. With that, I am delighted to introduce you to my guest today, Dr.Dan Sneider. Really excited because he is an experienced couples therapist, as am I. So we are going to have such an exciting and lively conversation. Let me introduce you to Dr. Dan Sneider. Dan is an EDD, LCSW, couples therapist, educator, and founder of Growth and Gratitude Therapy. With over 15 years of clinical experience, Dan specializes in helping couples move from conflict and emotional distance to deeper intimacy, secure attachment, and trust. Drawing on his training in attachment theory, emotionally focused therapy, and his own journey of trauma, divorce, parenting, and co-parenting, he's created his signature program, The Intimacy Shift, a blueprint for moving from conflict to lasting connection. Dan lives in Asheville, North Carolina with his two amazing kids. He works online with couples and individuals across the U.S., and he's passionate about helping people build emotional and physical connection in their most important relationships. So, really excited. Welcome, Dan, to the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sindee. And I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. If anyone is listening and wants to have a sneak peek of Dan's website, I invite you to check it out. It's intimacyshift.com, and we'll share more about that as we go. So we have a lot to talk about working with couples, the nuances, being attachment-focused couples therapists. Both of us have training in emotionally focused therapy for couples, probably as well as other approaches. You've shared that your own personal experience has really impacted you and your work, and that you're open to talking about that, which, Dan, is amazing. So maybe like this notion of wounded healer and your own journey, if we could start there, that would be so cool.
Yeah, I'm very happy to share and believe very strongly that, therapists are people too, and we all come to this work for a reason and with a story. And I know very much that I'm a work in progress and want all of the people I work with to know that I started somewhere, have made mistakes along the way, and have learned from them and try my very best to use what I know to make positive changes. So my story starts, as a child, right? And being in the home that I grew up in, I had a wonderfully loving, kind mom who was amazing in so many ways, and also did not protect me as well as I know she would have liked to from emotional abuse and exposure to harmful messages about women and relationships and sex from my dad. And so in that chaotic household where I was loved in many ways, but not protected in other ways, I really developed an avoidant attachment style, which I'm sure you've talked about some on your podcast in the past, but for anybody listening that wants to hear and learn more about that, really what it comes down to is that in order to feel safe, we all develop coping mechanisms to survive situations, to feel safe, to find love, and really to navigate, especially as a child, situations that are outside of our control. And so I really developed a style of being in relationship where I felt I had to take care of myself. I had to meet many of my own needs in order to find safety. And some of the consequences to that came out as I grew older, found myself in other relationships in life. And so um, I started going to therapy as a teenager and loved being in therapy because, wow, this is a safe person for me to talk to. So I very much at that point developed this idea that helping people, talking with people about their feelings felt good. And it was something that I needed. And so I started that journey to become a therapist. While at the same time, being in my 20s and 30s, was making mistakes in relationships, finding love, going through breakups, all of these other sorts of things. And so, those things came together in my marriage where fell in love, had kids, got married, did all those things. But I hadn't resolved many of these things from my early days and my avoidant style of being in relationship. And so I became fascinated with working with couples at that time because I was in a marriage, I was in a coupleship. And so I wanted to learn, how do we do this, right? I never learned how to do it, didn't have a class in school on it, but here I am. And like all of us out there, we want to love, we want to be in love, we want to have partnerships. But there are skills and practices that can help that to go better. And so I'll pause there for a moment. That's quite a bit about my story, and happy to talk more about what I learned in that marriage relationship and as a therapist during that time.
Yes. Thank you for that, Dan. And just really bringing that human element to it, which is so important. We are human as therapists, and I encourage any listeners to also remember that when you're meeting with your own therapist, don't put us on a pedestal. And yet with that, we bring experience and training. And so it can be kind of just what our ideal client needs sometimes. And for you, being in a marriage and starting to have difficulties and wanting to understand better, like what's going on for me? What am I contributing? What's mine? What's not mine? How do we start to make changes? Because as couples therapists, we both know people get stuck. They only have certain moves, they get stuck using those moves, and it's really hard to expand beyond that. So I love hearing about your journey and especially being able to say like you were loved and also not protected as much. And that's a really, really beautiful way for us to also think about our own relationships. Because often the love is there, but we kind of miss it, when we weren't feeling safe or something like that. So I really acknowledge you for framing it that way for everyone. Um, I think it'd be really interesting to hear how did the marriage issues start to impact what you were looking for in terms of couples training and becoming a couples therapist?
Yeah, absolutely. And such a busy time of life for anybody that has been there with
Mhm.
um, entering into this committed relationship. And then, like in my case, we had kids at the same time as we first got married, and so there were financial stressors with that. There were pregnancy and postpartum stressors, and we moved during that time, and just a churning and a very busy transition and time of life. And one of the main reasons I named my program that you mentioned earlier, the intimacy shift, is because it very much was that time of life a major shift in intimacy, both emotional intimacy and physical intimacy. And I've seen that as I've continued working with couples and individuals, there are these different times in life where major shifts happen, and there are consequences in the relationship to them. And
Mhm.
so in my marriage in particular, what happened more than anything was a shift in emotional intimacy. And so while that was happening for me personally, I was also doing a lot of reading and work within John and Julie Gottman's framework, which,
Mhm.
amazing books, incredible research there. And something that I've really taken into my own work from them is having actionable strategies, tools, and behaviors. So less kind of that traditional therapy mindset of like insight based therapy, and we're going to talk through things, and really action oriented. That's something that I'm big on is like, well, what are we going to do to change that? And so that was a great deal of training and reading that I did during that time. And then emotionally focused therapy work came a little bit later.
Mhm.
And I love that model also, and we can talk about it. But within my relationship at the time, some of the things that I learned then and then have implemented in different relationships since then are things like having a regularly scheduled check in conversation with your partner. John and Julie Gottman call it a State of the Union
Yeah.
conversation. But the idea there is the couple has a place, a setting, a time set aside where they can talk through the things that they're feeling or the things that they are struggling with or need help with.
Mhm.
And especially as someone with an avoidant streak, without having that time set aside, I am very unlikely to bring up my stuff in a healthy way. My instincts are still wired to avoid that conversation, to be fearful. If I say
Mhm.
something, will it lead to an argument? Will my partner be upset? And so having a time set aside for couples where they know ahead of time this is when and where we're going to come together, that is hugely helpful for me in relationship and for
Mhm.
many other couples that I work with. And so I love that as a starting point. And
Yes, and a
then
great
layer.
action strategy too, right? Because you have
Mhm.
to take action on having this State of the Union meeting.
Yeah, that's right. And such a great way to build trust, right? We have committed to doing something, taking action for our relationship. And then when we show up for it, it's a way of building trust in the
Yeah.
partnership. Absolutely.
So that was something you took from the Gottman's work, and you mentioned a couple other things like before diving into us talking about like the therapeutic approaches and everything that had an impact on either your marriage or subsequent relationships.
Yes. And so many of the things that I hear about in sessions and things that have happened to me in my relationship are when we look for outside the relationship for ways of meeting our needs. So things like using substances when we are feeling depressed or overwhelmed, as a way to numb or to avoid or to manage stress. Couples that struggle with either emotional affairs or infidelity. And infidelity is a part of my story in my relationship, and it's a long and complex story, but it's part of that story. And part of that larger theme of wanting as people to address the things that we're feeling, and there are healthy ways to address those feelings, and there are unhealthy ways to address them too. And so, learning those lessons and finding strategies for meeting those needs within the relationship is what creates that really secure, safe, and healthy connection. And so, within my relationship, like you said, like that was one action that was concrete that we could take, setting aside that time. And then another one also that I love from John and Julie Gottman is, their 5-to-1 ratio of positive regard to negative feedback or criticism. And so, even just having that in my mind that, we need an overwhelming number of positive praise and reinforcement for every time that we are going to criticize or give constructive feedback. So that's something that I talk with couples often is,
Mhm.
how often are you catching your partner doing something right?
Oh,
Letting them know you appreciate the thing that they just did, bringing gratitude into the conversation rather than just the times where, someone didn't show up or failed to do something.
I love that. Catching your partner doing something right. And this could also expand, of course, to your kid or your teenager, right? Because it's again, these are relational skills. That's so important. So that's a great one, Dan. I really appreciate that. And love how so much of this too is about our own awareness, which maybe we might get, from consulting with a therapist or a friend or just, some of our own deeper insight work or self exploration. But some of the awareness could be, oh, what am I doing that creates some disconnection or distancing, such as all those things you mentioned? Could be a substance, could be the whole sharing with another partner something that another friend or person, something that would best be kept in the relationship. How do you go outside and all of those things? Um, really starting with that awareness and even being aware then of, oh, am I giving those praises, giving the positives and reining in some of the criticism? I always say it's either helpful or not helpful. There's no neutral. And I really like to simplify that because it's a challenge, because we think, oh, there's got to be a middle way. I can say this, get my point, which is the little critical one, but still bring praise. And it doesn't work.
I love that framing that either we're either moving towards connection or away
Mhm.
from connection, right? Helpful or harmful, and
Yeah.
keeping that in mind with everything that we say within the relationship.
Yeah.
Certainly, another tool that I'll teach and practice along those very same lines is using I language rather than you language. And so much of our communication is, you did this, or my favorite is, I don't like when you do this thing. And, people
Mhm.
will try to kind of skirt around that. Well, I said I didn't like it. Well, yes, but we still want to stay in our I language. And so practicing things like, I really love it when we have our phones put away and we can sit together and really focus on each other.
Mhm.
That's such a vulnerable way of expressing what we want and how we want it. And I didn't say anything about the other person and how they don't put their phone away or how,
Yeah.
they're always, distracted doing other things. That may be something that I'm thinking about or struggling with. But if I say it in that way, like you mentioned, we're headed
Yeah.
towards harm rather than help.
And so often, one of us doesn't say what's on our mind. And you may be thinking that. And I see this with couples all of the time. Oh, I appreciate her doing this. Or I really appreciate that he did this thing, but never actually expressing it, making things so concrete and tangible. You have to actually say that out loud because look at the impact. Again, sometimes it seems really simple, but like you're saying, encouraging people to try this different move can be so helpful.
Something that I teach with that, because so many of my couples are struggling with both emotional intimacy and physical intimacy, is the connection between those two things. So often in couples that I work with, and not always the case, but often with a male and female in a couple,
Yeah.
generally for the woman in the relationship may feel more emotionally distant, wanting to build that trust, that closeness, being able to share things with our words. And the man in the relationship is often struggling with a lack of physical connection and wanting
Mhm.
to have more time where we are having sex, we are touching, we are kissing. And, how can we kind of move closer to the middle? And so being able as a couples therapist to be able to speak to both of those needs, which are both valid, and how do
Mhm.
we get, both to change, so that each person can have their needs met and we can be in the middle where there's greater emotional closeness and there's also more physical closeness instead of a battle over, well, I want this, well, I want this.
Right.
we as a team can really both get those needs met.
Absolutely. And that leads me into bringing in emotionally focused couple therapy into the mix. EFT, especially where you've laid out some beautiful communication and behavioral skills and practices that people can try. And yet, we know, and we've seen it as couples therapists, when a couple is really entrenched in their cycle, and we might call it the cycle or their dynamic, or the negative cycle or the dance that they get into, and they're really stuck. It's hard to bring in those other things until something changes in the cycle, which often is really the heart of beginning EFT work. So how did you shift into bringing in EFT as an approach, and kind of like combining that with some of the Gottman skills and everything else? Because again, I think people listening are like, okay, that's great. But when I try this with my couples, it doesn't work because they're still stuck in that same fight about something different, but the same fight over and over again.
Oh,
Mhm.
absolutely. We are speaking the same language,
Yes.
because that is absolutely something that I see regularly in my sessions.
Hmm.
And my favorite thing as a therapist, my absolute favorite moment in a session is when a couple turns from looking at me, telling me what's happened, and then turning towards each other. And I can see in their body language that, like, there will be an exhale, their shoulders will relax. One person will put their hand on the other person's shoulder. And in that moment, I know that we've turned a corner. We're on the same team, and we're both able to hear and see each other in a different way. And so that's my favorite moment. And the way
Mm.
that I get there and help couples to get there is very much by going one at a time, which is uncomfortable at first for couples. Each person has their feelings and they want their feelings to be heard. And I very much want to be direct and gentle at the same time by saying,
Mhm.
well, we've been trying it that way for a while. And if we want it to change, we have to do it a different way. That's why we're here. That's why you're talking with me. And
Mhm.
so, if we can hold space for one person to share their feelings, and we can practice some of these great skills like reflecting their feelings, validating for them, if we can practice that, and then we get to switch, and then you get to share your feelings, like,
Mhm.
trust in this process, come together with me, right? That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
And then we'll see how things go towards the end of the session.
Did you know 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health issue this year? That's why I created Mental Health Threads, to spread awareness and break the stigma around mental health. At mentalhealththreads.etsy.com, you'll find a collection of inspiring and fun products, from t-shirts and hoodies to mugs, hats, candles, and more, all featuring positive messages that encourage self-care and mental well-being. Bestsellers like Go to Therapy, Love Wins, and Still Here are fan favorites, along with our signature semicolon designs and Pride collection. Therapists especially love our exclusive items like Licensed Listener and Professional Secret Keeper. Our mission is to spark important conversations and remind you that you are not alone. If you're ready to make a statement and support mental health, head on over to mentalhealththreads.etsy.com today. Let's make mental health a priority together. Without going into a whole EFT, educational spiel, often we're looking at cycles where, it's typically like a pursuer withdrawer, or two withdrawers, or sometimes two pursuers, or then there can be, you know, a burned out or hostile one for either of those kind of categories. And as you're working with somebody, and it sounds so good. Like I can see some newer couples therapists thinking, okay, well, I'm doing what Dan says, and yet I'm still getting blocked. I'm still getting the resistance. Maybe help us understand from your experience, how do you handle the blocks? So if you're working with somebody and you want them talking to you and sharing their feelings, and the other partner is like, Wait a second, you have to hear my story, or like, I don't believe, what she's saying, and you're getting these blocks. Then what do you do? Because therapists need to know how to work with this.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's such a good question, and I'll share very much. Just
Yeah.
last night, my last two sessions of the day were with couples, and um, I really wanted to land the plane towards the end of the session. Let's come
Hmm.
back together as a team, and they weren't quite able to do that. Their hurts had been triggered, and the session did end with tension and with hurt feelings, and that never feels good as a therapist.
Yeah.
There's, for me, always, a little bit of second guessing. What could I have done differently? So I'll say that it's not just newer therapists. Part of it is
A
that
hundred
this work is
percent.
hard.
It is so hard. Oh,
Yeah, and
thank
there
you
are
for
big
saying that.
hurts. Oh, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I am always wanting to improve, what I can
Hmm.
bring to the table. And then also recognizing that these hurts are big hurts, right? That
Yeah.
that idea that coming together in a therapy session, opening ourselves up, there is very much a possibility of being hurt. So
Hmm.
much of being in a relationship at all is an act of bravery and faith and trust.
Hmm.
So I would share all of that. And I would say at the same time, like, we want to have incremental progress, right? At, in a lot of sessions, I will say to couples, we're not going to resolve every single thing here today or,
Yeah.
likely in our next session. But my goal is, where can we find some area of agreement? And we
Hmm.
can build on that. And sometimes with couples, I actually said something like this earlier today to a couple was, if the only thing that we're aligned on right now is that we are having a hard time connecting, we're not really liking each other, but we would like to feel better. Like, if that's all we can agree on right now, like, that's okay. Like, we can
Yeah.
agree on that. And our plan for them for this next week was, let's try and spend, even if it's 5 minutes a day, being in the same room and wanting to connect with each other. But if we don't want to talk to the other person because we're upset, we can just sit next to each other, and each person
Mhm.
can know we're both really hurt, but we're sitting next to each other because we want it to feel better. Like, that's still great because you're trying and you're showing the
Mhm.
other person that you're trying. And what I said to them, well, we'll see if this happens. But I said, you may go that whole 5 minutes not talking on the first day, but if you come back the second day and sit next to each other, I bet one of you will say something, and there will be a better connection that second day and that third day. So I'm very big on even just small steps. Where can we agree so that we can move forward together?
I like that. And especially how you're creating hope for your couple by encouraging that and then building the hope and even having them borrow your hope, right? Like by the next day, you might actually say something. You might talk to them, to the partner. And really, you're getting buy in over that desire for change, that desire for something better, which is huge. Even though it may be incremental work, you still know they do want something different. It's a really important reminder that this work can, go very slowly, or you can have some big shift and then it comes back to square one again. You're at the same fight. um,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
a challenge.
It is, and that idea of, where we sometimes circle back. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely happens. Where, oh,
Mhm.
we're back at this same fight or this same struggle. There is friction, and I don't expect anybody to be able to masterfully talk about these difficult things like parenting or sex or finances without feelings coming up. So we
Mhm.
expect that to happen, and we want there to be some tools for how to handle it when those feelings come up.
Yeah. And from the EFT perspective, that's really assuming that the couple is already trained and understands how to see their cycle, to see it happening in the room so that they can name it and say, oh, we're caught in our cycle. And like you said, take a step back. So you've already sort of pre-gamed them with a lot of work to get to this point that you're
Hmm.
talking about.
Hmm.
Um, and I wanted to go back to one thing you said, which I think is really good advice. reminding your couple that we may not resolve everything, and then acknowledging them for the work they did. And that's when, especially when you have a session that you don't land the plane, that's a great way to kind of close it, give them that acknowledgement that things are still hard, they're still working on it. And, you know, we're going for it the next time, right? Like that just helps normalize things a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Another one of, you can tell I have a few different sayings and things that
Yeah.
I'll go to, but another one of my favorites is, you do not have to agree with your partner. You often will not agree with them. But we do need to understand where they're coming from and
Mhm.
learn to respect that as a separate person with a different perspective. This is how they're feeling. This is why they're thinking what they are. But we don't have to agree with them. And that was really huge for me and in my relationships. And I really like to share that because, um, it's unrealistic that we will agree on everything. That's just, not going to happen. And just having that permission, right? Taking
Mhm.
that pressure off from the relationship. So many people come to marriage and family with this idea that we will merge lives and we will love each other all the time and we will be best friends and lovers and partners.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit fantasy, because real life will come in and there will be disagreements, but being able to disagree respectfully and yet still being able to acknowledge that you see the other person's perspective can get us through so many of these hard times.
Yes. Great point. Relationships can be messy, and but with that comes so much beauty and so much um connection and intimacy. And then you're going to dive right back to the messiness, and that is kind of life. Um so I want to go back to something, just to share a little bit also about the way that I work in terms of, when there is a lot of friction and you're getting blocks from each partner. It's very important. You were giving some examples of, you know, kind of looking at some different tools and acknowledging, what's going on and keeping everything focused individually, which I also agree with. Sometimes it's like, talk to me. You're not talking to your partner right now. Very important move. Um, with the blocks, number one, we need to expect the blocks all the time. Again, it's the messiness of the couple. We want to expect the block, and that means that you, as the therapist, are working right at the edge, right where you need to be, which is the heart of where things tend to go wrong for them. You're in the right place when you get a block. So try to think of it as a positive. And then one of the first things you can do, which makes it a little easier for you because you, the therapist, are holding so much in your head, dealing with everything in the room. What do you do when you get a block? Validate it. We're expecting the block as a therapist. And then the very first thing we want to do is validate it. Ah, it makes so much sense that you just said that. That's so new what she's saying. How could you possibly, you know, like take that in right now because you haven't even heard it. So it really makes sense what you're saying there. That's just like a very, very basic example. But for therapists listening, EFT can really help give you a plan in terms of understanding the relational dance and how you, as a therapist, can get in there with both partners and help them see that, like, you're right there with them. What they're doing makes sense. Everything the couple does and that huge escalation makes so much sense. And it's our job to order their experience and explain that to them, and then offer some of these other moves and approaches.
Yes, absolutely. And that modeling for the couple, that
Mhm.
rather than trying to fix the problem, solve it right away, do this, right? You're listening first, you're reflecting back to them, and you're really modeling that skill that you want for them to be able to use. So
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. So, Dan, in general, what do you think are some of the blind spots that therapists have when they're working with couples?
So a lot of what I hear from couples that I work with that have either been in individual therapy or have been in couples counseling before, So just like what we're talking about,
Mhm.
this mix of both modeling the skill and then providing concrete help or tools. So that it is a skill, being able to do both of those things. And so that's absolutely a blind spot that I hear about,
Yeah.
wanting to make sure we're both validating, modeling, and then also offering, homework or a practice, and then we'll come back and check in on it.
Yeah.
Wanting as therapists to be able to hold accountable the work that's happening in between sessions. That's a big thing. And
Mhm.
then the other
Yeah.
thing that I really want to work into my sessions early and often is that I am comfortable talking about physical intimacy, about touch, about passion, about desire, and sex.
Mhm.
It's a huge issue in all relationships. And by me modeling and saying upfront, I'm comfortable talking about this, asking about it, I'm showing that this is a place where we can talk about it and it's important that we do. And that's can be an area of discomfort, the way that
Mhm.
sex and physical intimacy is just in our culture in general is uh, often it's either we don't talk about it at all or we're talking about full intercourse, and
Mhm.
there's a whole lot in between that gets missed. So I will often talk to couples about well, tell me about just touch in general that happens during
Mhm.
the day. Are the two of you like sitting close together on the couch or cuddling in bed? Why or why not?
Mhm.
When was the last time that you were naked together or kissing and you didn't have full intercourse, but you
Mhm.
had that kind of closeness together? And these are things that, unless said directly by me, the couple is not likely to bring up on their own, even though each person really wants to talk about it and it's an issue. It takes me really creating that safe space and going there for it to enter the conversation.
Great point. That is absolutely a huge blind spot for many therapists. And, it's critical in couples work, also in individual work, but it can be so helpful when you, as the therapist, make that topic okay and you bring it up and you ask it. And many even suggest like that's part of your intake process to even, talk about, or first or second session, the physicality, the intimacy, the sex, and those are beautiful examples about looking at touch and just connection. So definitely follow Dan's advice there. That's really gold. I love it. Um, okay. Another thing is when the cycle takes over, everything's escalated. You've got a super heated couple in front of you. What helps you stay effective and regulated in the room?
Oh, I'm going to be thinking about that the rest of today, I think. So how am I regulating myself? So
Yeah.
much of my
Hopefully,
focus is
if
on the couple. Yeah.
Mhm.
So like you mentioned earlier, like modeling the practices that we want. I will often in sessions, I will use the pause for people on video.
Uh-huh.
I'm doing like the timeout
Yep.
symbol, so I will use a timeout, use a
Great.
pause, um, and I will often bring us back to deep breathing, bring us back to our bodies. And that's something that I try to model in sessions. And that's actually something often that I try to do as a parent. I
Mhm.
sometimes forget that one, but instead of telling my kids to calm down, I will try to get quiet and like model some deep breaths so that they can see me doing it. But that is in sessions how I will both work to regulate myself and the
Mhm.
couple is taking that pause, taking that time out, and then guiding us all together, me included, through some
Mhm.
deep breaths. Uh, every once in a while, I will also name it where I can say, I feel a shift in the room. I'm feeling a lot of tension, and try to name that for each person so that we can come back to our feelings rather
Yeah.
than that blaming. But such a good question. I'm going to be,
Mm.
like I said, I'll be thinking more about like, oh, how am I regulating myself in those
Yeah.
moments? Because
Yeah.
things that I'm doing that maybe I'm not as consciously aware of, I can also offer to the couples too.
Exactly. And that's a great self of therapist awareness that you can state, and this that's beautiful. You can state, oh, I'm feeling a shift. I'm feeling something happening right now. Let's take a beat. um, Doing the uh, calming and grounding, if the couple is open to it, can be super helpful. And again, it sounds like you really, really kind of help your couples orient to that right from the get go so that they know that's something you do in your work. I also think you stated so well, you direct them, you do the time out. As couples therapists, have to be so much more directive than the affirming or insight oriented individual therapist. So part of our job is to take charge and direct them. And I also find when there's a lot of escalation, it can be important to also match the emotion that's going on in the room. And because if you're telling somebody to calm down and they're really upset, they're thinking, she doesn't get it. She's telling me to calm down. She doesn't get me. So all the time we are trying to let our couple or our clients know we get them. And that might mean that we as the therapist then have to shift from our nice open energy to like getting a little bigger with them. Um, and again, it's case by case.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this is really, really such an interesting topic. I know many listeners will have more questions and want to see more about the program that you've created, the intimacy shift. I want you to tell us a little about that. But as we're kind of like wrapping up, Dan, and for therapists listening, what's something you wish you had known when you started doing couples work, that could help a therapist who's like just beginning to do this work today?
Mm. Well, very much a growth mindset, right?
Mhm.
It's even though as the professional, right, with the training and or coming to you for help and advice, you are going to grow as a person and as a professional, and so. One session, however it goes, does not make or break, that story. Whether the session goes terrifically, or it does not go well, there will be another session and another. So very much having that growth mindset and taking away, what can I learn from this hour, from this couple, from this training, and not turning it into a make or break, all or nothing feeling. So
Mhm.
that's something I very much keep front and center in my mind. Like I mentioned, I had a couple sessions yesterday that, they stayed with me, but I'm very much thinking about when I meet with that couple the next time, how can I approach it? What can I learn from that?
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for that, Dan. Same, right? Like we are in this. And what I appreciate about you so much, especially with that answer, is your commitment. I think, you know, a good couples therapist is just so committed to the work, to learning, to growing with their couple, to like going through those not so good sessions to get to the next one. Because deep down, right, there's this commitment we have to helping couples improve and have that connection means we see the impact on the kids, on the family, on their community. And so it does take this level of commitment and growth mindset that you really identified so beautifully. Yeah, thank you.
Mm.
Okay, share with everyone, please, like where they can find out more about you, your work, all those things that you do.
Yeah, yeah. As I've mentioned a couple times, at intimacyshift.com, drop your email and you'll immediately get this proven 6-step framework for having healthy, successful conversations with your partner. All the building blocks that I teach in my first few sessions with couples. So please join me there. And
Mhm.
then if you want to learn more or to add more to that, I have a 12-week program, also called the Intimacy Shift, a blueprint for moving from conflict to lasting connection. And that 12-week set of live sessions happens starting in January, in April, and in September. So I do that 3 times a year, and that's 12 weeks with weekly video calls with me. It's a group setting, very educationally focused for motivated individuals and couples that really want to learn these practices, to apply these skills so that their intimacy can shift for the better. So would love to invite any and all of your listeners to come and check that out. It's a great space that I've cultivated for people to grow in their relationships.
That's so cool. I love that you have 3 offerings a year, and the group really encourages normalcy and validation. So that's awesome. So again, thank you for the tremendous work you're doing to help couples and create a better world. Really appreciate you being here on the podcast today, Dan. Thank you again. For all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Look forward to the next time. And until then, remember to keep it simple and keep showing up. Thanks for listening to A Simple Therapy podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who needs it. Your support means so much. You can learn more or get in touch at asimpletherapypodcast.com. And remember, let's keep it simple and keep showing up.